I didn't read it. I bought it, but I didn't read it.
Well, that's okay. All I care about is you buy it. I mean, who cares about it? We have to go back to Doug's book because that's really the hottest thing right now, Doug.
And why I wrote the book is I feel desperate to share what I know with people who don't know what they don't know yet. And I hope that when you finish the book, you also want to reboot cancer care and you're very earnest and very eager about learning these things so that you can apply them. Because I can't apply them across the globe. I can't even apply them across Kentucky and Cincinnati right now. So I need help.
Welcome to AI in Healthcare. My name is Dr. Sanjay Juneja. I'm a hematologist, medical oncologist. And this episode, as well as the entire podcast, is designed to basically orient anyone listening that's in healthcare, that's in cancer, on how AI and tech is truly transforming things, both in healthcare itself, but as well as in our personal lives as professionals in whatever capacity. I am joined by my two hosts that I have a lot of fun with, Dr. Douglas Flora, who is now a recent author, amongst many other things. He's the chief editor of the AI and Precision Oncology Journal, as well as Dr. Deborah Pat, who is also many things, the chairperson for ASCO's AI Task Force, is COA president, and many others that I could, spend half the podcast speaking with. And today we have a guest that is a very good buddy of ours. I'm sure one of yours. There's no way you've ever heard of us if you haven't heard of him. And he's actually been on my podcast early on, was one of the first ones since I took over as host. And his name is Dr. Chadi Nabhan. He is also an author of multiple books. And the reason that we had Chadi, and the only reason, sorry, Chadi, jokes, is because, Chadi and Doug and Deborah and myself really believe in this need for education and explanation when it comes to cancer topics and just the intimidatingness of it all to begin with, but then especially to orient ourselves to something that is rather transformational and very quick compared to other things. It's not just integrating, sequencing, and we're going to get used to that now, or a certain, isolated technology. It is a true shift. And that is something that is important to discuss, because if you're not prepared, then you're surprised, or worse, you're resistant for something that can otherwise be very, fortunate. So with that said, Doug, I'd love to ask you, if you look at the preview of your book that's on Amazon, it's in the top 10 medical books, I noticed, and it is number 1 in oncology. And in the description, it basically says, look, in a world where we used to just basically cut, poison, and burn, we have new tools in cancer. And I think a lot of people still classically think of it as those three things. And I would love to hear what your thoughts were and the urgency you feel to possibly make people more kind of amenable to recognizing it's just so much more than that.
Yeah, I think, all of us are practicing in an era where we've moved from that, the burning and the cutting and the poisoning, to more targeted therapies, to immunotherapies, and now this next generation of bispecifics and CAR-Ts. And I guess I'm really, I'm optimistic and I'm excited to have new tools. I think, Sanjay, you've been in practice now probably 5 years. Deborah and I are probably 21, 22. Chadi's like 60, 65. I don't even know how many years he's been in practice, but something like that. So, yeah, that's right. And it's just been exciting to see what's happened the last 5 years. So I was pumped to capture that in a book and talk about the future state of where we're headed and where we've been, and look forward optimistically.
Sanjay, you'll have to, when you're young, it's hard for you to imagine how things were early on. I actually mixed chemotherapy. At some point, I actually mixed Taxol and Taxotere. I literally mixed that because I know it's hard to believe. I wrote chemotherapy orders by hand.
Me too.
For those of you who are listening, Deb, Doug, and I may sound like we practice in the, I don't know, 100 years ago. Actually, you'll laugh at this. I showed my kids, I don't know if this is going to be on YouTube or not, but I showed my kids a cassette. And I said, "What is this?" And they completely were clueless. The point of this is, going back to your question to Doug, I mean, Doug's book tackles something that is so important, which is we hear about AI every day. And I think AI is going to be consumed by people that we care for and we take care of in clinic, as well as by our colleagues and so on. So it couldn't be more timely for Doc to get this book out to explain how it's going to affect cancer care. So, and I haven't read the book yet. But I told before we went on the air, I have the audio copy waiting next week, as well as the hardcover arriving for me on Tuesday.
Chadi, I just want to caution you. There's a lot of really big words.
Oh, he might just might go right over. But it's funny, you mentioned the mixing of the chemotherapy, and I'm just going to do a side note here and explain, or at least discuss how people talk about dependency as a real concern, which is a justified one when it comes to AI and different technologies. It's like, well, we might become dependent on things, but then you also need to think about how, as the treatment of cancer has evolved, like there are things we have become dependent on, and I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. Like I am not manually calculating in general my chemo orders, so I am dependent on our EMR being able to do so, and our pharmacist. And so there are certain dependencies that aren't always bad. One, I mean, most people don't know north, south, east, or west anymore, and I would believe that 99% of the people that live in this world would think that's crazy. But it's like, for better or for worse, nobody knows, just because of the dependency on AI. So there's good dependency, then that can assure things better. And
I think that the biggest example in my mind is how many phone numbers can you remember off the top of your head?
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think I was trying to give this as a metaphor because the thing is, like today we must know about AI, right? Who knows in 5 years what other things we need to do? And I think all of us on this podcast, we have a vested interest in hopefully disseminating knowledge and education to the public. And maybe in 5 years, there will be something completely new that we must also figure out how to tell people about. 20 years ago, there were so many books that were written on the internet. How do you even use the World Wide Web and so on? So I think we evolve, technology evolves, and I think right now we all need to adapt and adjust to understand AI.
Let me challenge your first statement, though. And Deborah, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I would say about 2 years ago, the statement was, we need to learn about AI. How much do you really think, or is there a time or a place where learning about AI itself in a didactic kind of manner, is that something necessary for anyone listening right now that may be a physician or in cancer or a cancer survivor? Or is it the downstream effects of what AI is doing or giving vision to? And I say that to say, I saw a comedian on my news feed that was basically saying, like, if he's like, most of us, if we got sent back to time, like 200 years ago, like, what would end up happening, we wouldn't be this like crazy visionary that they're just so impressed by. We may just be, it might be speculated whether or not we're actually from the future or not, because we'll say, we have this thing called the internet, right? And like, oh, how does that work? And I'm like, I wouldn't have the first idea to tell them how the internet exactly works or what the World Wide Web is. Or, we talk to each other with the devices and, well, how does that work? So it's like, there is this turn where the technology comes and you don't even really know about how the technology works per se, but just what it enables. And I do think, and I'd love to know your thoughts, Deborah, who's really been at the forefront of seeing the evolution of what AI is from the very beginning in cancer to kind of how we're thinking about it at an institutional level of, are we in that comfortable place where some people can have the designated job of just knowing the downstream effects versus the others that really need to vet these models and think about machine learning and feedback and drift, et cetera? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that when I observe the next generation, particularly my children, as they're learning things, they don't read instruction manuals. They just learn how to do it and use it. And so I do think, as it pertains to digital tools and the AI that enables them, that most people will just learn them without a background understanding really of how they're working. Though I do think, especially in healthcare, that there's a critical mass of us that really needs to understand how these models are working, because of the challenges that are there, because sometimes there are errors, because as we look at solutions like ambient dictation to chart summarization to clinical decision support to clinical trial matching as sort of fruits from that same tree, an error early in your chart perpetuated can lead to pretty substantial complications in a patient, right? So errors, biases that can occur, hallucinations, though I know with the newer models that's less, I do still think you need to be aware of how things are working so you understand those limitations. But does everyone need to be aware of those things? No. And I would say, just like your analogy of the internet, Sanjay, not all of us are aware of the security breaches, the cybersecurity threats that are there. Like Unlimited Systems had something just recently. Change Healthcare had something, a year and a half ago that was really catastrophic to many people in the healthcare ecosystem. But most doctors really have no idea about what that is in the cybersecurity vulnerabilities. What they need to understand is how to not make their organizations vulnerable, but not actually what specifications, tools, and integrations need to have in order to diminish their vulnerability.
Sanjay, I struggled a little bit with that in the book. In my acknowledgments, I acknowledged Perplexity did my historical research for me, and GPT did the entire 300-page outline, chapter by chapter, pillar by pillar. And I'm going to sit down with Zach Cohane from New England Journal of Medicine AI for a fireside chat for our journal. Really, really want to talk through how much do we expect as physicians. Deborah, when you were editing JCO Informatics, is that going to go in the materials and methods? I don't know. We have to teach people enough to understand that they need to be critically surveying the landscapes of what bias was built in, what data sets they use to train the tools. If we're going to use critical decision support, and I worked near Appalachia, and there were no Appalachians in the data set, can I really extrapolate that? It's sort of like we have control groups in our clinical trials materials and methods now. I don't know the answers. I'm actually really curious about what Zach is going to say, because they've sort of pioneered this across healthcare, and we're really focused mostly on oncology.
I'd like to pivot back, though, to something Sanjay said earlier about your desire to write a book, because I'm fascinated about this with both of you, Chadi and Doug. I feel like, as an oncologist, we have so many scars of experience. And to some degree, I see in you, because I know you both now so well, this need to sort of share what you've learned so other people can navigate this space. And I feel like in some ways it kind of makes us immortal, right? That if you can share your knowledge with others to change the world that will exist after you leave it, that is like your gift. And in that way, all these things that you've gone through and taken the time to learn, that it sort of becomes immortal, is a gift to the society that will exist after you leave it. I'm curious about your motivations for both of you to share your insights with the world.
Honestly, it's hard to believe. It's hard to know that exactly what that trigger is, because as Doug will tell you, writing a book is really an adventure, and it's really no easy feat, because it's not. Yeah, it's probably was one of the hardest things I've ever done, more than any scientific paper I authored or co-authored. And I'm sure Doug will corroborate this, because first of all, you have to identify the audience, and my audience was everybody. So you really have to write in a way to make sure the consumer is going to understand what you're saying. My motivation stemmed really from the fact is I felt we live in an era where there's so much information, so much. There's so many search engines out there. You go to Google and put everything, and you'll find an answer. And I felt in dealing with patients and families that despite that plethora and abundance of information, there was still some level of confusion. In other words, you would imagine that because of the availability of this information, when you see a patient in clinic, they have solid understanding on breast cancer, right? Because they can research breast cancer and they can get a lot of information. But you know what? Despite all of this information, they're still going to come in and gonna really depend on Dr. Pat to tell them the signal from the noise. They still want to have the trusted voice. So that abundance of information, in my observation, did not translate into more knowledge and understanding on the patient level. And I figured out, let me try to take just my own experience and try to put everything pertaining to cancer in very simple language. And I chose to do this in a sequential manner. In other words, what happens with screening, diagnosis, and so on from A to Z, because it was very easy to observe that the information that exists out there did not translate into knowledge to patients. And the second motive was, it's a bucket list. I wanted to challenge myself. I thought, can I actually write a book, and would anybody read anything I write? And so far, only the three of you have read anything I wrote, so I'm happy about that.
I didn't read it. I bought it, but I didn't read it.
Well, that's okay. All I care about is you buy it. I mean, who cares about it? But Doug, you share with us what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. For me, it was curating. I felt like we're drowning in data, we're drowning in information, and I feel very badly that my partners and the people who work around me don't have the time or luxury to sift through the amount of things that we can. I'm a part-time doctor, part-time administrator, and so I have the luxury of a little bit more freedom in my schedule. I'm no longer scheduled every 15 minutes for the rest of my life. And I really, I wanted to study. I'm very nerdy that way, and I wanted to master the material myself. And yeah, it was a bucket list for sure, but I also really wanted to see if I had the discipline to do it. I'm married to a very disciplined person. I spend my life around very disciplined people. And it was challenging to set my alarm and get up and write on Saturdays and Sundays when other people are out golfing or playing with their kids or doing other things. So that was probably the hardest thing for me. Was I felt like the kid with chicken pox with my hand pressed against the window. Everybody else is outside having fun, and I'm sitting at my laptop typing. Deborah, your point of legacy, we've talked about this before. I remember those people coming up when I was looking at George Sledge and Cliff Hudis and Lee Schwartzberg for me as a community doctor. And I really, really looked to the people who were 50, like me, 54, for guidance of any way, anything that I could find. And so I guess I wanted to impart some of that. As you mentioned, we've taken some bruises along the way and learned a lot of important lessons. And I thought it was important for me to get that out of my head and on paper.
One of my favorite chapters that I wrote, just to echo just the bruises, that there was one chapter on communication that I wrote in that book, The Cancer Journey. And early on in my career, when I was Sanjay's age or younger, when I face a patient or a family and I communicate and talk to them, and if they're not happy with me, or I felt there's something is not really translating or being transmitted, I used to think, well, I've done my part. I mean, the patient is not understanding this. It's really not my fault if they're not understanding what I'm saying. As I matured, and I know, quote unquote, maturity is kind of questionable at this point for me, but as I matured in my career by age, I realized it is on me. If my patient is not understanding what I'm saying, it doesn't mean that the patient is difficult or the family is not willing to understand. It's actually, I am not communicating effectively. And that doesn't happen, in my opinion, early on, because you assume that you're doing a good job. And I put that really out there completely. I shared stories of situations where I believe I failed patients.
And I will just say, I think that as you think about how you're contributing to the world, I think all of us share this, because Sanjay does a great job of it in sort of how he characterizes education, on social media. Now you all have written books, but it's so compelling that you have to, make the world better for all the things that you've learned, right? I feel like it's the strongest drive, and I'm so impressed that you've done it. So Chadi now twice. And Doug now once.
When is your book, Deb? When is your book?
I've got to, catch up and read everybody else's first. I do though. I could do it. My husband and I have talked about writing a book together, actually. So we've talked about that. But you're inspiring us. Maybe we will.
I have to, Deb. I really believe, genuinely, I believe there's a book in everyone. Because there are certain experiences that you encountered, right, that only you are privy to, and there's a book behind that, similar to Sanjay, Doug, and myself, and so on. It's really about, what you want to share and why. And I think you have a wealth of experience and leadership, and everything what you have done over the past 20 years is just fascinating. So, I really urge you, I'm on the air, I'm urging you to think through it, because there's so
The
many,
pressure's
a lot,
on.
because I think we all know a lot of people would benefit a lot of this. But we have to go back to Doug's book, because that's really the hottest thing right now, Doug.
Well, I
What's
want
your
to double click. I want to double click on that, Chadi, because this is something that I think is we can extrapolate to some of the concern or thoughts behind AI. And you said something at the beginning. You said it, very eloquently. You said there's a sea and wealth of data that's overwhelming. Doug, you said the same thing. I think, there's all this talk about people being like, well, is AI going to replace doctors? And are they going to be KOLs? If KOLs are, a high volume of a certain amount of cases and knowing the outcomes and therefore having better predictability, and then you have AI that's able to look at aggregate the volumes, get an idea of predictability and outcomes and potential theories and this and that. They're like, everyone's answer is, the doctor's role will change, or the professional's role will change, and nobody really double clicks on that. And I think in hearing you give that answer, I think this is where this professional capacity lies. And that's really on being, in a manner, this collection or this lens of what to get from a world of accessible knowledge. Because when you go onto ChatGPT or anything, Grok, Claude, we all know and have read that it kind of tailors to you, and then you start having this kind of personality fit. In that case, you're on your own saga. You're asking the questions. You have to think about what questions to ask. What are the follow-ups? And you're getting your own identity in that process. With that said, you have personalities between the different applications. But I think there's a reason that journalists have been around for a long time, for news stations and a preference on the news station, and even to a degree, brand personalities and social media creators. And that's not necessarily the ingenuity they bring from their brain, but sometimes just the manner. Talk show hosts, right? They've been around for decades. The manner and the type of content that's delivered to you and what relates the most. And I do think that will always be something for that KOL, the key opinion leader, or those people in medicine, is who do I like to receive information from? Who do I think is going on that quest? Because there's so many different permutations of the roads you could take. Whose journey am I kind of vibing with or feeling or wanting to embark with? And then, of course, then you start shuffling them. And I think that is the key where there will always be the need for not just the human, but humans in a professional capacity, is that there's so many more journeys we can take. And you kind of just piggyback someone or those that align with the things you're interested in, and then you learn from them. And I'll tell you, Chadi, you're very good as a moderator, and with your extensive podcast hosting experience, Healthcare Unfiltered. Now you do that. You basically say, tell me this, not because I don't know it, but though I want to hear it from you. And then you're able to sometimes get a wealth of information on this, relatively, similar points or topics. That is our future. And that's why I don't think that society is going to be frozen. Some people say no economic status will change. It'll be so rigid because no one can outperform anyone else because everyone has tools. I mean, the theories go, quite extensive. But I think the difference is just because it's accessible doesn't necessarily mean that everything is given to you. And the same thing exists with data in healthcare. I mean, so people are like, there's a ton of cases in cancer. There's a lot of people that can process it. How come we're not doing better? It's the same situation. What do you take from this wealth of data, these federated models that are coming out, and what journey do you go on? And I think it's an interesting, analogy or allegory.
I think the four of us really appreciate that it's oftentimes we see that there are tools that are available that systems are not and people are not optimally using. And that's a real fear, I think, in this space, right? That you won't use all the tools that you have before you optimize care for the patients we serve. This is a huge fear. And I think, Chadi, I know in your book you talk about CML. And I can remember I was a medical student at Baylor in 1999, and one of my colleagues, a friend of mine who was a medical student also, she just lost her father to CML. He died related to a transplant. And that very year, the New England Journal came out with the first article on imatinib mesylate. 53 out of 55 patients, I think, had responded. And overnight, the survival for CML changed. And I can remember just, not 10 years later being in practice and diagnosing a young woman with CML and putting her on Gleevec and telling her how amazing it was. And, Gleevec, you can have some pretty bad swelling. She had a little bit of swelling in her ankles and puffy eyes, and she was really had a great response and was very upset about, this toxicity. And all I could think was, gosh, this world was so different just a few years ago. These tools were not available 10 years ago, and people died, with what you had. That's really, really terrible. So I know that's a fear that I have, and I think we all share.
This is what I'm excited about AI. I have one comment, and then Doug, I have also just one question for you. Just curious about this, but this is why I'm excited about AI, Deb, because it's really about timing. To me, any technology, any innovation, if we're able to use that to accelerate whatever we are doing, lives will be saved. Lives will be saved. And this is not, again, I'm not using hyperbole here or so on.
No, you're right.
I was giving a talk this past week at a meeting in San Diego, and I started my talk with a story of a patient of mine, a CLL patient that I lost. And today, this patient, had he been diagnosed with CLL, I'm very confident he would not die from CLL. I would be able to control the disease because we have so many tools. So if we can take that AI, whatever it is, and make it help accelerate whatever we're doing, drug development, regulatory, everything, we are going to save lives, which take me to something I'm curious about. Doug, again, as you wrote this book, did you struggle in simplifying the technical concepts to the readers to be for your book?
I did, and I want to answer that because that's an important question I struggled with quite a bit. I had this conversation with Deborah maybe yesterday or 2 days ago that I think my mom would have survived her breast cancer today. And maybe that's why people listening should understand that you may be tired about hearing about AI all day, every day in your feeds. I don't really care. There has to be a burning platform here for us to act. There has to be a groundswell of understanding by physicians that in delaying the adoption of these tools, you're actually causing harm. You're screening poorly. You're making worse decisions for treatments. You are missing things like pharmacogenomics and DPD testing. And so I'm not trying to be critical of my partners. These people are working their tails off. I'm trying to help them. And by curating this content into the book, the technical and the non-technical, my hope is to just show the light and show them that they do not have to be grinding as hard as they are. And I use the term a lot that medicine is groaning under its own weight. And so the book for me was a way to capture those things in a sober and reasonable way, to share it with context. And the way I tried to simplify it was every single chapter starts with history. Starts with von Leeuwenhoek and the microscope, animalcules, right? Fleming, bacteria, the first loom, automating things, sort of in an algorithmic punch card fashion. Horses in 1900 in New York City being replaced by motor cars. And I hoped that by placing that in those contexts, they would understand that we evolved every step of the way to learn how to use PET scans, right? I mean, the three of us at least understood when those first came out. Sanjay, we didn't know how to read them. We didn't understand the false positives. We didn't even have SUVs in the early days. We certainly didn't have Deauville scores. And the people who were reading them were all over the place. And so you'd end up taking out histoplasmosis, and you were pretty sure it was going to be cancer, and then it wasn't. Or sarcoidosis. How many times did you get sent mediastinal lymphadenopathy, and it turns out the patient had sarcoid, and you had a parade for the patient in the room? I think that's what 50-year-old, 60-year-old doctors have in context that maybe the younger group doesn't yet have. And so that's what I was eager to share, Chadi. And I did one technical chapter of the things that I thought they ought to know about how we got here and why things are accelerating so fast now. But really the take-home point is that we're learning 10 years in 1 year right now.
And there will be people, mark my word. I mean, I don't know if I'll be here or not. I know Deb and you will be here because you're much younger than me, believe it or not. I know. But there will be a time where 20 years from now, people will look upon the way medicine is practiced today, and they're going to think people are crazy. I can look at the body language of Sanjay when we were talking about the fact that you're about he's like, what were these people doing? Like, how were you practicing? But there will be people in 20 years from now, really, that they will be looking at things and they will be really wondering how we did this. It is a part of evolution, and we just, I think it's upon us to remind people with the history, explain to them the present, and really motivate them to look into the future, because that future is us, unfortunately, being sick at a hospital. I've always said we are current patients, future patients, or past patients. No one's going to escape the healthcare system. Could be cancer, could be heart disease, could be lung, but unfortunately, there's no immortality. So may as well shape the future that we are going to live in.
And the way you explained that, Chadi and Doug, both of y'all, is I got to bring this up. I was speaking at CI4CC. It's a connectivity conference that was in Miami this past week, and the same thing was actually at the conference before. And that's really this concept or newer idea I've been hearing, that AI, when we think about it, it's like, oh, it's innovation. What are we going to know more that we didn't know? What are we going to do that we didn't do? Right. So that's maybe some of that tiring, Doug, that you're talking about that people are experiencing. But they both introduce this concept of, can we just talk about the error it will reduce? And like, when you really think about the magnitude, when you said, oh, we took out people with granuloma or sarcoid, like, I've been there. I've had a patient that had a lobectomy, meaning like one of their lobes of their lung was taken out, and it was very hard to access. It was very suspicious and hot on the PET scan. And it was like you said, the celebration. We celebrated. We're like, great news, you don't have cancer. But what do you think that person's mother said? Well, what about my daughter's like lobe that's gone, right? And so these AI models now are able to do things that we weren't able to before. They can tell the gradient drop off of the avidity, what the kind of avidity or uptake of these of otherwise known as SUV and where it gets hot on a PET scan are, and what are they like and not like. And they do that because they take the patients that had the lobectomy, look at the pathology. If it's really good, you scan it in, and then you have digital pathology with the quote unquote radiomic data. And this is the whole concept of AI. And you look at those 100 cases, 1,000 cases, and try and say, okay, these are the ones that seem to be sarcoid and these are the ones that are cancerous. So we have less error. And that less error piece is just as important as innovation. And there's a lot of it still in the healthcare system.
Sanjay, I want to make a point about that from a part of this podcast, and I'm so excited. And for the audience who doesn't know, we acquired this, so you're going to have us every 2 weeks. And I'm so sorry that you're going to have to listen. It's over and over again, this burning platform stuff from Doug. But I read an article yesterday about the way we dose chemotherapy. And back in the Chadi days and the Deborah and Doug days, it was a slide rule doing AUCs, like a plastic thing that you slid.
Oh, I use
that.
I use that.
In a couple of years, your patient's CT scan, they're going to calculate your body surface area. Like, we're not talking kilograms per meter squared. We're talking about millimeters of body surface area based upon computer-based algorithms. Can you imagine that? You're not 1.23, right? We have a new metric for how to dose chemotherapy, and it's based upon your actual surface area of the inside of your body. We couldn't do that without it. Just think how much smarter you'll be when every patient has PGX. Every patient has germline screening, probably at birth when we prick their heel, and the number of crises and calamities that we can avoid just by prediction. And then on the other end of it, the FDA has said we're going to cut the cost of drug discovery and drug development by 70% with these tools. And so trials and drug discovery that used to take 14 years and 1,000 PhDs and $1.4 billion, now with AlphaFold, you're going to be able to put that into a couple days worth of work and come up with 15 compounds that can cross the blood-brain barrier, that are orally available, that hit this marker, this whatever gene we haven't discovered yet. And even diseases like glioblastoma multiforme will be amenable to treatments, just like CML or CLL are now with tyrosine kinase.
Yeah, and to the point of the liver, they're also looking at their models, looking at how much functional hepatic reserve does one have, just based on those kind of uptakes and these metrics, because that also matters on maybe your tolerance for something that relies on the liver and its liver's ability to excrete it. So there's so many modifiers and factors we're going to be able to introduce that will hopefully do right by patients and not have that kind of wider swinging volatility. And then to your other point, these drugs, I hope everyone understands, like, the model is the way it is in this country, and Deborah can speak much better on this than I can, in part for what it costs to have gotten that drug. So they were like, y'all spent a lot up front. May have been $1 billion. We're going to make sure you get that back, by having these certain costs that are defined. When that cost goes down, that means the drugs unequivocally will also go down. If the cost to get there and to have, past the failures that occur in a phase 1 or phase 2 and toxicities, all these reasons, once you get there, you have a total cost. If that total cost is less, that means the drugs are less, and hopefully that means then our insurances are less, especially in this otherwise very expensive setting that is cancer.
Well, and I think this whole process, like I said, of we see so many challenges. I know that all of us in our organizations are trying to influence changes, particularly around AI and digital healthcare. I see that, and none of us have things change quickly. I mean, in my organization, we have over 100 projects, that are on the table to implement. And so it's hard, honestly. But I think we see the real benefits of having our systems work better for the patients we serve and just to preserve our staff. I mean, things like nursing efficiencies are really important. Like nobody wants to hang their own chemotherapy, guys. We need our nurses to work. And by 2030, we'll have a million nurse shortage in the United States. So, implementing AI tools and digital healthcare tools to improve efficiency and to make us better is not merely just a nice to have, but it's survival for the workforce challenges that we have in our future.
Y'all, I just hearing y'all talk about the books, I checked, and mine is for pre-sale order, at least on Amazon. It doesn't come out till May of next year. Very different. It is just truly We Need to Talk About Cancer. It's by Macmillan Publishers. They have the side that's neon squid, so it's designed for people like 12 to 15. But I think Deborah actually helped me kind of with my final draft of that, and it just talks about all the basic principles. And I think that's where a lot of this generative AI stuff is coming. I think people are going to be so much more informed. They're going to be so much more empowered. ChatGPT made this kind of big announcement last week where it's like, we're not giving medical or financial advice anymore. But it seems you can still get education, so you can always get guidance. But before, I haven't tried it since, but you could screenshot your labs and it will give you a shot at it, or you could put your questions down. So it'll be interesting to see, even legally and I would say legally more than anything, how these things fall into place and get structured when we know that there's a big need. I'll also say, Chadi, real quick, a shout out is to Tim Ferriss's book, Tribe of Mentors. I really enjoyed that because it gave you the opinion of highly successful people, from like chefs to Ben Stiller to people that you just kind of know, and how they approach this question, and a lot of them are different. And for me, it was very humbling because you had very opposing views, but equally successful in their fields. And I think that's kind of the humility that comes with a lot of what we try to do. We try to know best, but it's also always in our opinion, and not us as in us four, but anyone listening. But at the same time, I think, when we said, hey, Deborah, you need to have your own book, I really would encourage anyone to recognize that the eye by which they see the world is one that is not only very unique, but one that so many would identify with. And you just start somewhere, and you really develop yourself in the process, especially when there's a responsibility that comes with it. But it really does bring out a version of you, because suddenly more people than just yourself and your own meandering experiences are kind of at the mercy of this eye that perceives the world. And I think it's something that everyone should take upon.
I feel like the intense motivator for me, and I feel like it's true for you too, is just that you want so desperately for things to be better. And I will say, I think that's true, when I'm on the Hill advocating for good health policy, or when, I am working with organizations about AI or digital healthcare solutions. You want so desperately for it to be better for the patients you serve. You want it, because we all have had those patients that have succumbed to something, and then, the next month, another therapy comes out that they could have benefited from. You realize how precious that timing is, and I want, and I know you also desperately want, for change to happen more rapidly. And we recognize real barriers, organizationally advocating for appropriate capital allocations for the changes that we need to make, the integration piece, because we can't put in 5 new systems and have 5 new dashboards for people. Like, there has to be a parsimonious strategy for how we move forward. And there's real hazard for our patients and for our staff of not getting where we need to be faster. So, I mean, that compels me so much. I feel like it compels you too.
Hey, there's a story in my head that I will never ever be able to get rid of, and it's a young woman named Molly. She's 27, and Sanjay, this is again historical adage, but she died in May of 2005 of a HER2 positive breast cancer, and then like 20 days later, oncologists were weeping and clapping and high-fiving when we saw Herceptin data in the adjuvant setting. And I'll never get over the fact that we lost this beautiful young mom, and I know she would have been okay. Had that trial closed 6 months earlier, she could have lived so much longer. Think same thing about Enhertu now. Same thing. Pick your drug, your ibrutinib for old CLL patients or Gleevec or others. If we can use these AI tools to develop the drugs faster, to develop the trials smarter, to analyze them faster, to take the data sets and publish them faster and better, those trials get published a year and a half, 2, 3, 4 years earlier, 10 years earlier for some of these things. All of those mollies are alive because we employed these tools. And so I guess that's what I would impart for the audience is this is not a hobby for me. This is not a hobby for Deb. You guys, this is accelerating the thing that we wished existed all along. And these tools are here. They're ready to be employed. And if you don't study them like you studied immunotherapy, or like you are about to study CAR T and bispecifics as they hit solid tumors, or genomics or pharmacogenomics, you're doing a disservice to people that you say you care about. And so I guess I would entreat upon you, and I'm not trying to guilt you. I'm just trying to say you can't ignore this thing. If you want to save lives, it is more likely to be done with better, smarter drugs, better early detection, better decisions. And that's all the stuff that these tools are going to deliver for you. And you don't even know it yet. So I guess that's the long answer for Deborah's first question, why I wrote the book, is I feel desperate to share what I know with people who don't know what they don't know yet. And I hope that when you finish the book, you also want to reboot cancer care and you're very earnest and very eager about learning these things so that you can apply them. Because I can't apply them across the globe. I can't even apply them across Kentucky and Cincinnati right now. So I need help.
To close this episode, I'm curious, we all encounter this after our panels and on a lot of DMs. People, and I don't think there's any age when somebody doesn't look for either a career change, a career shift, a career interest, or even a hobby. To those listening, what is one thing you would tell someone who would like to know or pursue the kind of things that you all are when it comes to developing, learning, doing something new, and ideally fostering that back out into the world? What is something you would guide either a pre-med student or again a 50-year-old that just has a lot of juice and wants to get their wheels turning? How do you direct them?
I mean, I don't want to sound like a cliche, but I really feel the three things I tell people all the time. Follow your passion. I mean, you just have to follow your passion. You really have to. Don't make the decisions purely for financial reasons. I think everybody want to make a good living, and you should. You've earned it. But I think you make mistakes if that's really the sole reason you make a decision or you make a move, or you really have to. I've never really made a decision just purely of finances. The second thing is just being agile and flexible. Like don't be really set only in your own ways, because sometimes as we progress in our career, we just think this is the only way to do certain things. And I think realizing you could always learn. You really could always learn. You are never too big or too smart or too senior to learn. If you ever get to a point where you think you know it all and you can't learn anymore, then you've made a mistake. I still learn every single day, whether it's from my colleagues or from other venues. And lastly, I think sometimes this is a tiring thing, but this is maybe a little bit too personal for me, is I like to challenge myself. This is not meant, again, as a cliche. I just feel I've never achieved, I've never reached the level of satisfaction where I am comfortable that I've gotten there. So I keep challenging myself. I keep pushing the envelope. I keep pushing, and I think it gets tiring at times, but it probably keeps me motivated and keep me try to go forward.
That's beautiful. Deborah.
So a couple things. One, it's incredibly gratifying to be an oncologist, right? It really is. Like, we have such a privilege to see people through this journey. But burnout is also really common. The work is very hard. If you love your patients, like most of us do, there are things that are emotionally challenging. And so I think having another way to have job satisfaction where you feel like you're contributing to the greater good over a long haul, sort of not on the individual patient level, but in the system level, is really useful. And I will say I have chosen to do that. I really love my practice. I've never changed jobs. I've been at my practice for 20 years. Have a wonderful leader and wonderful teams that I'm really very happy with. But, I have itches that I need to scratch in terms of advocacy and AI and digital healthcare that I don't always get within my practice. And so I would say I've looked outside for professional development when I've done that. And that's led me to do a couple of things, finishing my PhD, getting my MBA. I did ASCO's leadership development program. I got very involved in COA. And actually, all of those things at the end of the day served my practice, which was great. But for me, that was a way I could sort of have a little bit of a pivot professionally without changing jobs in a career I really loved. And I think that's important, actually, because I see a lot of people hit what they feel like are roadblocks in their career, and they believe that the answer to that is that they change jobs because the grass is always greener on the other side of the pasture. And I just, not that that's the wrong thing for people. Sometimes it's the right thing for people, but it's not the only answer.
Yeah, Sanjay, I have a bunch of oncologists entering their mid-40s, and I remember when I was there, I felt like I was on a conveyor belt some days, and just the patients were relentless. They're great. We love them. It's actually my favorite part of my job. I see patients on Wednesdays, and I'm refreshed again. But I was really burnt out working 80-hour weeks in my mid-40s, and moved into more of an administrative role with a part-time clinic. Most of my partners are there now. My brother's 47. A bunch of the mid-40s people are trying to figure out what is their side gig, what's their hobby, what's their other thing. Some people it's running a marathon. Some people it's writing a book. Some people it's admin or other. I guess I would say I think that probably the most powerful thing for me was the growth of my network. The people that I surrounded myself with in my 40s were people that were continually improving, continually growing, challenging themselves, like Chadi said, to grow as people. And when you're around people like that, you develop this sense for like a bias for action. And when you see problems, now you're motivated to fix them because you've seen other people actuate and do those things. And so I've been inspired by these guys. I've been inspired by you, the people who have taken a slightly different path to helping save patients' lives. And it's been intensely gratifying for me to be surrounding myself with people, and I say it all the time, functioning at the very, very highest level of performance to try and fix larger issues at scale. And for me, that's intensely gratifying. And it's why I got involved at ACCC. It's why I started the journal. It's why I wrote the book. It's why I'm on here with you guys. Is I think that there are doctors that aren't 54 years old that I wish would have told me that when I was 42 and struggling. And so hopefully we get some people on there to be chasing their own passions, whatever those might be.
And Dr. Juneja?
Those are beautiful answers. And I look up to all three of you and I admire y'all and I learn so much. So one of them has to be, if you want to get somewhere, like find the people that are there and are paving the way. And if one believes in you and you show yourself, there will be someone that believes in you, that it just helps you infinitely. Two other things that I think are important when it comes to, prospectively either changing completely or adding on to what you're doing is recognizing, please, especially in today's world of technology, like there is never one way to do or accomplish something. There are many ways. And if the way isn't paved, you can pave that way. I mean, that's the world we live in, with the ability to communicate, to network, to have the digital media streams. I enjoy helping people as an oncologist, one-to-one, exactly as Deborah said. And then I found tremendous fulfillment and helping, people at scale for just tidbits of information so they can be their best, and biggest advocate and ensure that they're getting the right health or confirmation or whatever that may be. And I think, those two are the people around you. There's no one path to any end result, and then find what fulfills you and then work backwards. So it's not so much like, can I get fulfillment from doing this or that, or is this going to fulfill me? Find what fulfills you, which is based on passion, as Chadi said, and then figure out a way to get to that destination. And I think, that's by putting those three things together. This was amazing. Thank you all so much for your time. Chadi, we will definitely be having you back.
Yeah, I think this was great. It's a much needed platform. Congratulations on the podcast and on Tensor Black and everything. That's really amazing. I learned so much from this crew, and look forward to reading the book and having Doug on my show.
Let's go.
Thanks for the collaboration.
Yeah, thank you all for helping move things along. I guess I would say for our audience, we're going to have this crew back frequently. We're going to be back every 2 weeks. We're going to start to dive into more and more topics. Sanjay has built an incredible podcast, and we're thrilled to be joining him. And as our audience grows, we'd love to hear from you guys too. So reach out to Sanjay on DMs or on any of us on LinkedIn, where we're quite active, all four of us, and send us what you'd like to hear more of. And then we'll tackle those in future episodes. We're coming out every 2 weeks. So thanks for joining us.